Welcome to the lesson on forests and water. I'm your host, Mr. Rast. Let's get started. Arthur Clarke once wrote, "How inappropriate to call this planet Earth when clearly it is ocean." And far out in the ocean is where this story begins. On an island called Easter Island, many of you have heard of. It's only 64 square miles and it's just a little speck in the Pacific Ocean, 2,300 miles from anywhere. Easter Island is remote, but not deserted. From time to time, visitors drop by, like Dutch Admiral Rogeveen in 1722. When he arrived, it was on Easter Sunday, and he named the island after the date of his arrival, and left the first written account of the place and the people who live there. According to Rogeveen and other 18th century explorers, the Easter Island had a population of about 3,000 islanders. Their existence was wretched, farming off of poor rocky soil, and their only access to fresh water came from murky lakes or inside volcano craters. There was scarcely a tree on the island. The people were small, lean, and quite frankly described as being miserable. But amidst the squalor of this island, there were some surprises. Especially some 800 massive statues scattered around the island, shoulder to shoulder with their backs to the sea. How are they carved? How are they quarried? How are they moved? How are they erected? And by whom? When the Europeans asked where the statues had come from, the islanders gave them this reply: "They walked here." Failing to recognize the sarcasm when they heard it, the Europeans embarked on a series of wild speculations that have continued to present day. Maybe spacemen set up the statues with anti-gravity devices. Maybe a highly civilized lost continent had sunken in the sea, leaving only Easter Island behind. Maybe they were flung into place by volcanic eruptions, etc., etc. Since the islanders had either forgotten what happened or didn't feel like sharing, it was left to the Western scientists and historians to piece together the story of Easter Island with calipers, shovels, microscopes, geographical surveys. And here is what they found out. Evidence that dates back to the year 400 indicates that Polynesians were the first to populate Easter Island. There are various pieces of evidence such as the islanders' skulls, blood types, social system, language, and crops. All points to the Polynesians. Pollen samples taken from lake beds show that the island was then thickly covered with vegetation. Hacking out clearings from the jungle, the Polynesians built and planted, and soon they enjoyed the typical Polynesian diet of yam, breadfruit, banana, sugar, coconut, chicken, and Polynesian rat. Small and tasty. Their lives were rich, their babies thrived. They populated the island with little effort, and in their spare time they carved stone monuments, especially statues. The statues were moved and set up with logs and rope. Recent experiments have proved that when the statues are strapped upright onto logs carved from sled runners and raised onto a track of wooden rollers, a couple of dozen people can pull them easily. So they cut down a lot of trees, not just for rolling statues, but also for firewood and building materials. And by the year 1400, there was scarcely a tree left standing on Easter Island. And what good are trees, you might ask? Let's find out. To understand the role of trees, we need to look at the way water moves around in this watery planet of ours. Clouds hold moisture, which falls as rain or snow. It falls within the watershed. It's an area that collects small streams into major rivers, and ultimately runs to the sea. The water evaporates from the land and the sea into the air, where it condensates back into clouds. The water cycle is complete. Water in the atmosphere is fully replaced every 12 days. When precipitation falls in a forest, the water has many options. Some barely penetrates the ground before it's taken up by the roots and passed back into the air through transpiration. That's plant breathing. Some goes deeper all the way to the groundwater. And what is groundwater? Dig deep enough hole in the ground and you'll hit water. That's groundwater. The top of the groundwater is called the water table. Forest soil holds a lot of water because it's porous. It's a mixture of clay, sand, and decaying organic matter. The soil is honeycombed by channels made by roots, burrowing animals, and fungus. The top layers teem with bacteria which break down organic compounds into chemical nutrients that dissolve in the water, drip down, and are taken up by root systems. By contrast, open land has less biological activity, and so it holds less water. Trees are giant water pumps made up of roots and leaves connected by a simple plumbing system. The roots suck up water and dissolved minerals, which travel upward through the tissue beneath the bark, to the leaves where they are converted into sugar and proteins. These foods travel back down to the roots, where they support the roots to allow them to further grow. The leaves also exhale a lot of water vapor back into the atmosphere. There's a lot more to trees than meets the eye. Underground, there are hundreds of miles of tree roots anchoring the tree to the ground and holding it in place in the soil. It's a marvelous thing, them trees. Falling leaves make up a good part of the dead organic material that's on the ground. And the tree's shade reduces evaporation from the material. So in a sense, the tree manufactures its own soil in which it grows. This takes time, of course. Small plants produce little topsoil where bigger plants can grow. Eventually enough nutrient-rich earth builds up to support a forest with all its teeming species. So what happened on Easter Island? When a tree is cut down and its roots die, the topsoil loses its anchor. 4 to 5 feet of earth may eventually be washed away, and there is no quick way to replace it. Without trees to absorb rain and replenish groundwater, the island's streams and springs eventually dried up. The air became less humid, and rainfall diminished. As fertile topsoil eroded, crop yields fell. There was no wood for houses, no fibers for fishing nets, no sailcloth, no logs for canoes. Rivalry for resources led to permanent warfare. Unfortunately, clan prestige was displayed by erecting statues, so the last trees were quickly cut down in a frenzied effort to show off. The population peaked around 7,000 people in the year 1550 and collapsed so quickly that some 400 statues were left unfinished and in quarries. But the rival clans fought on. They pulled each other's statues down, and by the year 1860, every statue on Easter Island had been toppled. The point of the story is not that the people of Easter Island were somehow strange, silly, or different from anyone else. Quite the contrary. Like the rest of us, they were creatures of habit, and their way of life, farming, forestry, building, and display was hard to change. Easter Island is very small. From its summit you can see the whole thing. The person who cut down the last tree must have known there were no more, and still he cut it down. Our planet, while much larger, is still finite. Like the islanders, we too can see it all. And like the islanders, we have no means of escape. Is it still possible that we can take stock in our resources and change our habits in time to avoid the fate of Easter Island? If you enjoyed this story and animations, pick up the book Cartoon Guide to the Environment. Thank you.